Hello, grade 10 students, and welcome to a new PowerPoint lecture. Today we're going to take narrative writing or writing a short story. This is related to the lesson we took last time in literature where we read The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. So how do we write a short story? Elements of a short story. What are the characteristics of this type of writing? One very popular type of narrative writing is the short story. What is it? A short story is a piece of fiction writing, so you're writing, it's not something that happened in real life, it's fiction, not real, that can be typically read in one sitting and focuses on a self-contained incident or series of linked incidents with the intent of evoking a single effect or mood. Just like what happened in The Story of an Hour, our focus was on the death of Mr. Mallard and how that affected Mrs. Mallard and what ironically happened at the end where he turned up to be alive and she died of whatever it is, of shock for having seen her husband still alive. Now, famous classic short story writers include O. Henry, Kate Chopin, the writer of The Story of an Hour, Guy de Maupassant, and Edgar Allan Poe, whose stories we're going to read also this year. What makes these authors such remarkable short story writers? What is it about them that makes them those amazing writers? They are true masters at combining the 5 key elements that go into every great short story. Character, they know how to write a character, how to draw him or her. The setting, the time and the place are very important when we write. The conflict, what is the main conflict? How creative was the author in writing the problem? The plot, the events, how did the author link all those events together? Sometimes the authors, we can see in movies and some stories, the genius of some writers in just evoking so much amazement from the audience of what he or she had written. And the theme, what's the basic idea in this story? So all of those are the main elements in writing a short story. Now, the 5 essential elements. A story has five basic but important elements: the characters, the setting, the plot, the conflict, and the resolution. These essential elements keep the story running smoothly and allow the action to develop into a logical way that the reader can follow. First of all, the characters. How do you develop your character? How do you write a character? The characters are the individuals that the story is about. The author should introduce the characters in the story with enough information that the reader can visualize each person. Remember, you are writing. Make your writing rich so that I, as a reader, would imagine what your character looks like. This is achieved by providing detailed descriptions of a character's physical attributes and, of course, personality traits. Every short story should have a main character, of course. That person would be the focus of your story. The main character determines the way the plot will develop. The plot, how the story starts, what happens at the middle of the story, and how it ends. This is what a plot is. The events in the story will develop and usually will solve the problem the story centers upon. Of course, this is our hero or our main character. However, the other characters are also very important because they supply additional details, explanations, or actions. All characters should stay true to the author's descriptions throughout the story so that the reader can understand and believe the action that is taking place, and perhaps even predict which character may do next. Okay. So next you have your setting. The setting is the location of the action, where and when. An author should describe the environment or surroundings of the story in such detail that the reader feels that he or she can picture the scene. Again, be rich in your words, be rich in your adjectives, in feelings, in adding the senses. Okay? Unusual settings such as a fantasy world can be interesting, but everyday settings can help the reader to better visualize the story and feel connected to the plot. So the setting depends on what I asked you, of course. But as I said, please be detailed in your descriptions and be creative. The plot. The plot is the actual story around which the entire book or story is based. A plot should have a very clear beginning, a middle, and an end, with all the necessary descriptions and the suspense. Keep the reader on tiptoe, called exposition, so that the reader can make sense of the action and follow along from the start to the finish. The conflict. The conflict is the main problem in the story. Every story has a conflict to solve. The plot is centered on this conflict and the ways in which the characters attempt to resolve the problem. When the story's action becomes most exciting, right before the resolution, this is called the climax. Okay, what happens right after, right before the ending? For example, the hero suddenly appears when his friend was about to be killed by the villain. This is the climax. Okay, and then in the end, he helps his friend out, and everything goes back to normal. Resolution. The solution to the problem is the way the action is resolved. For example, Katie often resolved a conflict by finding a compromise for two fighting characters or helping fix any mistakes she made while switched into someone else. It is important that the resolution fit the rest of the story in tone and creativity and solve all parts of the conflict. It needs, what they're saying here is that the resolution needs to make sense. If you want to be creative and write a plot twist, go ahead. By all means, I just love to read plot twists. But let it be in tune with what you have written, not just totally out of place. Now, use of literary devices or figures of speech in short stories. In order to add more appeal and attraction to a short story, figures of speech such as the following should be used: simile, metaphor, personification, and irony. I told you guys you need to be rich in the way you are writing, you need to be detailed, and those are the tools that will help you do so. We call them either literary devices or figures of speech. They both mean the same. You guys are probably used to figures of speech. What are those? What's a simile? What's a metaphor? What's a personification? Of course, there is a need to go through them again. Some of you might have forgotten what they are, so this is what I'm doing here. Both similes and metaphors are forms of comparison that compare two different things in a sentence. They can be used to make your sentences more interesting. So this is the whole purpose. Make your story more appealing. How are similes and metaphors different? A simile is a word that compares two things in a sentence. You can usually tell if a simile is present in a sentence when you see words as, such as the words as or like. Don ate his salad like a vacuum cleaner. So we're describing Don's eating to a vacuum cleaner using the word like. His arms were weak and felt like noodles. We are comparing his arms to noodles. The thunder was as loud as fireworks. We are comparing thunder to fireworks using the word as. So the words as or like are bolded to show that a simile occurs in the sentence when we compare two things using the words as or like. A metaphor also compares two different things in a sentence. However, instead of saying that one thing is like another or as another, something else. A metaphor speaks about one thing as if it were something else. We don't use like or as. A metaphor can sometimes use words such as is, are, or was, and other words to signal that a metaphor is present. However, a metaphor never uses like or as to compare. Let's take a look at the examples I gave here. The smoke was cotton balls billowing from the chimney. Not was like cotton balls, it was cotton balls. So it's a metaphor. It's speaking of one thing as if it were another. You are my hero. You are like my hero. No, you are my hero. The sun was a furnace. A furnace is like an oven. His heart was a rock. I didn't say his heart was hard as a rock. His heart was a rock. So that's the basic difference between a metaphor and a simile. Now this brings us to personification, and as the word indicates, it's a figure of speech where the author gives human qualities and characteristics to non-human things. Look at my car. She's a beauty, isn't she? Of course, here the writer is personifying the car. You can't say she, but when he wrote she, it means he is personifying it. The wind whispered through the thin grass. We know that the wind does not whisper, humans whisper, so we are personifying the wind. Some of the most beautiful figures of speech used in stories are the personification. The fire swallowed the entire forest, comparing it to a human swallows. Okay? Now, very important figure of speech or literary device is called irony. What's an irony? The definition is a contrast between what is expected and what actually happens. Types of irony. You have situational irony. Something happens that you wouldn't expect. You expect the opposite of it to happen, but it happens. For example, the examples are very important to understand this figure of speech. A fire station burns down. This is a situational irony. You expect the opposite of that. A policeman who breaks the law. Of course, situational irony. A policeman should abide by the law or should protect the law. A doctor who is sick. A marriage counselor who wants a divorce. Posting on Facebook how useless you think social media is. This is situational irony. Now, dramatic irony. This is type 1. Type 2 of irony is called dramatic irony. The reader knows something that the characters do not. You're reading, or maybe you're watching a play or a movie. You know that this guy has already made an accident while the main character is waiting for him, but the character himself or herself doesn't know. Let's take a look at the examples. In Home Alone, probably most of you have seen that comedy movie. We know that Kevin has planted traps everywhere, but the thieves don't. In a movie, the character buys a new house he thinks is nice while the audience already knows that it is haunted. In a play, the bride is waiting for her groom when the audience knows that he was just shot dead by the mafia. So just like when you're watching a movie or a series, this happens all the time, and we call it dramatic irony. You know something that the characters don't. Now, verbal irony, verbal meaning words, irony using words. What is said is different from what is meant. Example, the teacher hands in a 3 out of 10 grade to a student and she says, I am proud of you. Of course, here the teacher is being ironic. She is using verbal irony. A boy refuses to jump in the pool and his friends tell him how brave he is. Of course, they are using verbal irony here. So those are the 3 types of irony. I would like to see some of them in your stories. They are very, very helpful. Now, the story of An Hour by Kate Chopin, of course, I'm not going to read it again, but it would be very helpful in teaching you the elements of a short story, what important characteristics need to go in your short story, how it began, how we were unable to predict what would happen to Mrs. Malar, or at first her character was unpredictable. She learned of her husband's death and she threw herself into her sister's arms and started sobbing. We were like, she's so sad for her husband. And then she went into her bedroom and refused anyone to follow her. And then we saw how this all unfolded, how she was feeling actually happy. She was looking at how nature was all alive, the tops of the trees that were all aquiver with the new spring life, the delicious breath of rain was in the air. She was feeling music. Okay, the notes of a distant song with which someone was singing reached her faintly. The countless sparrows were twittering in the eaves. So we noticed, and from what the author wrote, that Mrs. Malar was actually happy. Now, moving on, more description of her feelings, how she felt that she was now free, how she's going to be living for herself. But the author here used a lot of figures of speech, of course, how something was creeping towards Mrs. Malar. She felt that something was coming towards her, creeping out of the sky, reaching towards her through the sounds, the scents, the color that filled the air. The author here uses personification to speak of that strange feeling, and we learn later on that something was creeping toward her and she had this weird feeling. Obviously, this was death because this is what happened to her at the end. Now, so many description of feelings. I would like you to include that. The senses, include those in your short stories. They would really enrich it. And finally, the reason why this story is so famous is how it finally ended. The strange plot twist that took place when Mr. Malar walks in and Mrs. Malar was so shocked that she actually died. A totally unexpected ending. And there was, as I explained in the comprehension lesson, there was dramatic irony here. The doctor said she died of joy that kills. There is a dramatic irony. Why? Because we know that she died because she was shocked to see him. She was so happy that she was now free. And seeing him again alive gave her this horrible shock that simply killed her. So there is one touch of dramatic irony in the story. So I want to see something similar to this. I am really looking forward to your stories. Your turn to write, and I gave you a prompt. This is what it's a graded writing. The weight is 2. You boarded the airplane looking forward to the trip of a lifetime with 3 of your best friends from school. Destination, meaning where are you going? A lush Caribbean island, the Maldives. You put your handbag in the top compartment and sat down when suddenly a strange, almost surreal-looking man, surreal means he doesn't feel real, came and sat beside you and your friends. As the plane took off, a wide, mocking grin appeared on his face as he turned to you and said, "You think you're going to the Maldives, don't you?" Now, here I'm invoking in you something. I want to trigger in you something creative. I want you to write to me creatively. I'm not sure what type of stories I'm gonna get, but I know you guys are excellent writers, are creative writers. Let's see what you come up with. Please use figures of speech. Please use feelings. Please use adjectives. Write all the elements of the story and let me see how good you are. Write creatively what happened on that trip. Make sure you include story elements, sensory details, and figures of speech you learned in this lesson. Please include a plot twist or dramatic irony. I would like to see all of those. And until next time, please take care and thank you for listening. Bye bye.